The government and protesters are calling this international pressure a Western conspiracy for regime change. Is it?
Well, regarding the protest, I mean, the one that was coming toward our embassy is, from what we could tell, very orderly, very disciplined, and we took the petition and I read it, and of course there, peaceful protest is a key element of American political culture, so that people have a right to express their views that way. And in terms of, though, the objective of the protest, there is no Western conspiracy. And of course I can only speak for my country, okay, but from a bilateral perspective, we see this resolution as an effort to move the Sri Lankan government toward implementing what are some very good recommendations coming out of a Government of Sri Lanka commission. It's the Sri Lankan government's own commission with some excellent recommendations. Now, I have to say that on accountability, we find it is disappointing that it didn't go into a lot of the allegations, and it really fell short of what we think, and some people in this country think, that it needs to be addressed. But by and large, it's a good report. And so what we'd like is what I think a lot of Sri Lankans would like, is to where's the government's action plan? Which of these recommendations has the government embraced? And which do they feel they can't? That information is not available, or at least not publicly available. And this was the substance of our discussions with the government on these issues. So we don't see ourselves as an enemy of Sri Lanka. We are not an enemy of Sri Lanka. We really are not. And I think once whatever happens in Geneva happens, the bilateral relationship will still be here. I hope to continue the good working relationship I have with key people in the government. But no doubt about it, we're going through a tough time now. But by no means is this any sort of conspiracy.
As a diplomatic mission in Colombo, how do you react to a host government mobilizing forces of people against you?
Sure, and that was clear. They did. But at the same time, I have to say I reached out to security officials and thanked them for the excellent protection we've always received, and asked that they ensure it would be coming, and I got those assurances. So we felt we were ready. We took precautions, of course. We remember the UN situation, where one of the ministers blockaded the building for a while. But by and large, I knew we could count on the government to fulfill its diplomatic obligations.
Thousands have rallied in Colombo against this resolution. What message does the U.S. take from the protests?
It's not clear to me how. I think part of the problem with this whole issue is that the Sinhalese community, I think the rural community, not the Colombo folks, but I'm not sure how aware they are of these issues, frankly, because I think people have day-to-day issues. They have daily bread and butter issues. And so I don't know how, villagers in Hambantota, for example, feel about LRC recommendations. I do know all over people are concerned about particular issues raised in the LRC. I mean, rule of law issues. People are disappearing, or being picked up, or they go to the police station and they're not charged, or their families can't find them, or these are recommendations I thought that would serve and benefit everybody in Sri Lanka, even though they're in the context of aftermath of the war and addressing, largely the needs of the Tamil population. But when I looked at these recommendations, I think they would make the whole country and the society stronger. But I don't think that the majority community pays much attention to it at this point. So I think the people who were demonstrating was organized by the government, and that's fine, politically aware supporters out there, things like that. But I do think that it did reflect the anger and the reaction of the government against what was happening in Geneva. I did not take it, frankly, as a repudiation by the population of Sri Lanka against human rights issues.
Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, in a letter to Minister G.L. Pires, mentioned that the US government was disappointed that you were not given a preview of the report. Did you expect one?
Well, that was the again, this goes back to this long conversation that we have had with the Sri Lankan government, okay? And, you know, my approach to managing the relationship here is to try not to surprise the government with anything. And if something's coming, I do my best to communicate it to the government. So they may not like what's coming, they may disagree with it, but, you know, they know what's coming. And so we've had this dialogue for a long time with the Foreign Ministry or Ministry of External Affairs, with Temple Trees in Washington, with the Sri Lankan embassy there. So these are all familiar issues. And because Secretary Clinton had, you know, decided that we would not prejudge the situation and gave the government the phrase time and space to address it, she felt, or we felt, that entitled, that we wanted to know a little bit ahead of time what the action plan was going to be so that we could be prepared ourselves, because the report comes out, it has recommendations. What is our response? And we were looking for a little bit of a heads up, and we did get it. I have to say, I was given a bit of a preview, and then early that week, Minister Pires briefed the entire diplomatic corps, which he does from time to time. You know, so that way I do feel we were allowed to share in this, as the Secretary had asked.
Were you provided a roadmap about how Sri Lanka would proceed?
No. And again, these are diplomatic conversations, but I was given just a sense of what the government's plan would be, some of the recommendations that they thought were, immediately going to be possible to accept. And it reflected the statement that Minister Nimal Sripala de Silva made in Parliament when he delivered it. It reflected that ahead of time. So I'm not claiming I got any insider information. It was more like courtesy, and then the minister followed up by briefing the diplomatic corps.
It has been just 2 months since the LLRC report was released. After the US gave Sri Lanka this much time, why a resolution now?
Well, from my point of view, the clock did not start ticking in December of 2011. It started in May 2009 when the fighting ended. There was tremendous relief that the war was over. I think everybody would agree to that. But in the way of human events, one issue's over, others come up. And so there were all these issues that were being raised immediately after the end of the fighting. In particular, very human issues like missing. People not knowing where their family members are. People wanting death certificates for family members they knew were dead. People wanting to be able to, go back to their villages. And I understand that the government had huge challenges. They had about 280,000 IDPs for whom they were responsible. Okay, and we were working with them to try to get those folks resettled. I understand that, but at the same time, there were these other issues that I'm sorry they didn't begin to address. And so those issues continued to fester with really not much being done. So from our perspective, yes, the report came out, but everybody knew what was going to be addressed in them because the LRC was very open. It took testimony, everybody talked. So there was not much surprise about what people cared about. So it's not really accurate, I think, to just view this as a 2-month time frame. The government's known for a long time what some of the key problems were. And the LRC articulated them and put them into one document. And the government has started working on some of these things, and they started trying to resolve the land claims issue. And another area where I think the government has done well is the rehabilitation of ex-combatants. I think everybody, even political parties here, Tamil political parties, recognize that was a pretty good program. So there's been this process, but not on all the issues, and now is the time, we think, to ask the government to commit publicly in a forum, in an international forum, this is our plan, and we commit to doing it. That's what we're asking for.
Assistant Secretary Robert O. Blake just made a statement that the resolution was still being discussed. Is that to be interpreted as the resolution may not be tabled in Geneva after all?
I think for the record we would say that it's still under discussion. We're still consulting with members of the Human Rights Council. I know Sri Lanka continues to consult and lobby. We were pretty clear about what we think needed to be done, but I think until we actually get to the point where a resolution is introduced, I wouldn't want to commit to it. And neither do I want to give anybody the expectation there's still a chance, but I think what we have is we have a very good dialogue now, back and forth, and that's what we were lacking before. That was part of our frustration.
If the resolution goes through and Sri Lanka does not stick to the time frame, what next?
Well, I don't know that there is a time frame. I mean, again, this is part of a process. I mean, we have been talking with the government for since May, before May 2009 about issues, and up to a certain point, I think that some in the government felt these were foreign issues, that we were meddling, that we were the only ones that cared about these certain issues, and yet the LRC disproved that. These are Sri Lankan issues. I did not testify before the LRC. These were people, everyday people who'd suffered from all communities. And they made these points. And the LRC Commission, I have a lot of respect for those folks on the commission. I think it was a tough job. They never expected to have to serve for so long. They gave up everything to serve. They traveled. They took a lot of verbal abuse in the press, a lot of questioning of their patriotism, and they delivered. Again, I have to make the exception for accountability, but by and large, it's a very good report. So that process will continue. We're not going to. I don't think anybody intends to make a threat to Sri Lanka, but we feel that the more attention that is paid to these issues in an international setting, the more pressure they will feel to actually meet their obligations and deliver. But I can't imagine at this point, I don't think anybody's talking about, okay, a year from now, what do we do? We're going to wait and see how this develops. And I'm hoping that people, I think there's a considerable sentiment in Sri Lanka for progress on some of these issues. It's just it's a little frustrating that the government doesn't share that sense of urgency.
Has the U.S. government run out of patience?
Well, I wouldn't say that. I would say that again, we expect to see certain progress within a reasonable period of time, and I think Secretary Clinton, the U.S. government, has been very patient and given the LRC process time to work. Okay, and it had to be extended a couple of times, and these are complicated issues. I mean, so I think we would continue to expect to see progress. If we don't see it, we will comment on it. We will call attention to it. But I think we're in this for the long haul. I don't see us walking away and throwing up our hands and saying, you're on your own, we're going to take whatever action we feel is necessary, because that's not how you get progress. I think even in this run-up to the session in Geneva, that run-up seems to have generated activity on the part of the government. It seems to have stimulated them to take new steps or maybe facilitate ongoing ones. And I know they don't talk about everything they're doing. They probably feel they don't have to answer to people. But the point is, with so much international attention on the LRC report and all the good things in it, I think we'll maintain our focus and always be ready to work with the government. I don't see us kind of throwing down an ultimatum.
The draft resolution calls for an independent, credible investigative mechanism. Does the military court of inquiry satisfy?
I don't want to prejudge any court of inquiry. I think, though, that the burden of proof would be on the government to explain how a military court of inquiry would be seen as independent. I think that would be a tough one. I think these are good steps that any military takes. They have their own internal processes, but the point is independent, objective, and I think it would be a hard sell for the government to convince people that this was an independent one.
The US government expects something different?
Well, we're still, we're waiting for Sri Lanka. We're hoping that Sri Lanka will decide, okay, they didn't produce that mechanism in the LLRC report. It doesn't mean that they still can't come up with another mechanism. We and I think the rest of the international community have offered technical support, advice, expertise how to do this. Other countries have done it and are willing to provide advice and support. That's always been there. The government, has not so far chosen to take advantage of these offers. Those offers will be there. So I can't say that we have a particular model in mind, but clearly we will be looking to the government here. Okay, what's the next step? If you feel you can do something domestically that's credible and internationally accepted, okay. If not, then we're looking at some sort of international mechanism. But all along, the whole purpose is to partner with the government here, and I hope that message has gotten through to them.
The US State Department calls Sarath Fonseca a political prisoner. How does that reflect on the judicial system in Sri Lanka?
Well, yes, we do consider Sarath Fonseca a political prisoner. That's in our annual human rights report. That's not to say that that's not a comment on any other charges that may be pending against him or anything like that, but it's just the manner in which he was chosen to be prosecuted and all of that. So that very much we feel does not reflect well on the judicial process here. I do think rule of law institutions are under stress in this country. That's by no means categorizing all the courts or all the judges, but I do think there is a lot of pressure brought on civil society, brought on the judiciary, and political influence sometimes plays a large role in things. And you're right, then we get to the issue of accountability, and any mechanism that the Sri Lankan government might choose to set up, even outside the military court, to address these issues would have to make a persuasive case that it will be independent and follow procedures. It's a tough case to make. I'm not saying I don't think they can, but we would be waiting to see what they offer.
Secretary Clinton invited Minister Peiris to Washington, D.C. in March. Was that aimed at getting some assurances from Sri Lanka that could lead to a dilution of the resolution? And is he going?
Again, it's all. I know I sound like a broken record here, but it's all part of the dialogue. The U.S. government had already made its decision that we would support a resolution at this session of the UN Human Rights Council, but we're still reaching out to the government, to Professor Peiris. Come and talk to the secretary. Tell her what your plans are. What's the way forward, even beyond Geneva? That's what a partnership is. I mean, we have disagreements with most. I mean, you can't pick a country, I guess, and find which doesn't have some sort of issue that we're always working on. And so the idea is continue the dialogue. We hope he still will come to Washington. Dates to be determined. We still have a robust relationship with Sri Lanka, and the only way you maintain it is to talk. And sometimes I think it's good for people to go to Washington, because if they just listen to me here, sometimes they may think I'm out of touch or I've been here too long or something. But then you go to Washington and you hear from our political bosses, and that this is indeed the thinking. This is what the U.S. government considers a concern, and that can be a sobering experience, but also an opportunity. So it's clear this is the U.S. position, and I think that's what this invitation is, and we hope he will accept it.
What does the U.S. government see as the way forward for Sri Lanka?
On that, I think Sri Lanka, has a democratically elected government. It ended a nasty a nasty war. Okay, everybody was, relieved that it was over, ourselves included. But there's the aftermath that they need to deal with, and I think that if they keep their focus and continue to accept, or at least accept, international assistance and support, they can work through this. Because one of the things we recognize is that President Rajapaksa is very popular. He's very popular. He has a lot of support. We understand that. And so, therefore, that's been our focus, that he has the support and the leadership that could implement changes, that he could, deploy his considerable leadership skills and popularity and majority in the parliament to implement the LRC recommendations and make the case to the Sri Lankan population at large. I mean, we respect his position, and we've been encouraging the government to use it to make some of the hard decisions that the LRC recommends.
How do you respond to Minister Samarasinghe's statement in Geneva that the loudest human rights advocates also contribute least to Sri Lanka's recovery effort?
Well, he said that countries who are complaining aren't helping, and that's not true. I mean, He didn't say us, but we've given a lot of assistance to the people of Sri Lanka, the IDPs, and now the people who've been resettled. We've got projects in Hambantota. We're all over the place trying to support solving some of the issues. So I think that really was unfair. Yeah, I just think it's unfair to say that. He did not name us, but I think, and I can only speak for the U.S., but we've been a real supporter of Sri Lanka here for a long time, and we will continue to do so, and I just think it's an unfair and inaccurate comment.